Well, good morning. I've prepared a couple of questions, but I also, I'm hoping this is going to be a good old conversation for this morning. So, Charlie, the first question is actually for you to get us kicked off. And it's a little self-serving because I've already talked about the importance of local broadband. But from your perspective, why should someone work with a small provider?
Thank you again. Thank you to Texas Rural Funders for having us here, and look forward to having this conversation. This is such an honor to be with you two up here on stage. So thank you for that question. Why is it important to be work with a local provider? You said it, the accountability, being invested in the community. I shared a story last night with you about the accountability. I have to train my kids because they're getting asked at school from teachers and classmates, when are you going to get, my copper upgraded to fiber? My parents are needing this. My kids are going to be able to run a communications company by the age of 21 because I've got to let them know, hey, this is how you have to answer that. But just having that accountability, being at the ballpark, seeing people at church, just being invested in the community and wanting to improve the community in the places that we live. So I think that working with a rural provider, and you mentioned it also, I agree with everything that's in your book and a lot of the points that you brought up. We're in for the long haul. We're not looking for a short return on investment. We want to invest in the areas and the communities that we do business with.
And I think it's absolutely right. There's something incredibly powerful about seeing a provider at the grocery store, at school, or, maybe not talking to your kids about fiber, but, about being able to say, hey, what's going on? When am I going to get this? And that's a different relationship and probably builds that trust that is so essential for communities and providers to go forward with. Yeah. Jennifer, did you want to add anything?
I feel like Charlie said it all, but really, I think we all know that we know our communities best. And so providers that have been working with our communities or want to start working with our communities at that local level are going to serve us best. And getting to know them, getting to know all the providers that are currently in your community. That's something I was planning to say later, but I will say it again and again. Get to know the providers that are currently in your community. Learn about what their plans are. Learn about ways that you can support their efforts. Work together. The public-private partnership piece, you will hear that over and over again today. That's absolutely going to be key moving forward.
Well, and that's a great segue to my question for you, which is that communities, counties, and states all need to get ready to come together to help secure funding from the NTIA. We know there's these 5-year broadband and digital equity plans that need to happen, but we still lack a lot of data. Why is an understanding of assets and connectivity and community demands so important going forwards?
Well, I'll answer that question a little bit in reverse. Most folks in this room are pretty familiar at this point with the fact that broadband data has been collected at the census block level, meaning that coverage has been overstated the entire time we've been collecting broadband data. Congress has addressed that by saying that we're going to start collecting broadband data at the address level, which means it's going to be much, much better than anything we've done before. The state of Texas is also producing a broadband map of where we believe that we will be awarding funding, which communities are going to qualify. Regardless of whether it's address level data, census block level data, state level data, city level data, no broadband map is ever going to be perfect. Even if it was perfect, it's perfect for about 1 minute because there's new infrastructure going in all the time. And so understanding what's really going on with the assets, with infrastructure, with other things in your community, and even the demand of residents in your community is going to be critical. Because once we do have new maps from the FCC, once Greg shows us his map of whatever that looks like, it's not going to be perfect. It's an impossible task to make a perfect broadband map. But if your community knows where some of those imperfections might be, you're going to have the opportunity to talk to Greg and his team, and they're going to have the opportunity to talk to the federal government. And maybe a community is left off the map, and really they should qualify for funding. If you have that local data, you can share that with Greg, and then Greg can go talk to the FCC and to the NTIA and everyone else and hopefully get more money for the state of Texas and allow for that community to actually benefit from everything that's going on with broadband.
That's great. Thank you so much. And actually, if I could piggyback on that for both of you, how do we empower communities to even know where to start? How do people in this room, how can they help? Where's a good place to start? If we know we need data, we know we need good maps, we know we need surveys of community needs. Where do we start?
You start by finding who the local leaders are that are interested in broadband. That's not necessarily an elected official. No offense to the elected officials in this room, but you don't have to be an elected official to be a leader in your community. We've seen, all across the state and the communities that Connected Nation has worked with, we've got some county judges that this is their passion. We've got some folks that are running economic development corporations that's their passion. We've got folks that are running chambers of commerce that broadband is their passion. We've got superintendents, folks that work in a city manager's office, the city manager themselves. All different types of folks could be your community champion or your community leader. So really, figuring out if your community already has that champion, chatting with them if you do have that champion, then if not, finding someone who could be that champion for your community, and maybe it's you.
And I think that from a provider's perspective, we need to be held accountable. We need to be transparent. And there's a lot of providers that do that today, and there's some that need to improve on that. And so that's just being brutally honest. I mean, there's a lot of expert analysts on Facebook that tell you when you suck, so you got to listen to that. But we need to have that accountability, and as providers, we need to be transparent. A lot of that's already taken place. But more of it needs to definitely happen as far as having these open conversations. Providers are already showing a lot of their maps and a lot of their facilities to these local leaders, and just to be able to show them, hey, here's where we are, and here's where we could go to help you, and what's that dollar amount that is going to need to be helped out to accomplish that. So just full, open, transparency, communication.
That's great. Thank you. And I think one thing I'm learning from this is how important it is for us all to come together. This is an all hands on deck approach. It's not just local elected officials. It's not just providers. It's digital champions everywhere. It's people who didn't realize that they were stakeholders in the digital divide until maybe the pandemic hit. And then suddenly you realize your constituents were without connectivity. So we all have a stake on this. And finding those digital champions and bringing them together seems so very important. Charlie, question for you. Customers know they have a good internet experience or a bad internet experience. What does it take for a customer to have a good broadband experience?
Well, that doesn't happen overnight. It's been, and I've got some slides here. It's just years of planning, years of growing the network. You may start and have a linear connection day one, but then you've already have an engineering plan where you need to provide redundancy, protection, securities. Making scalable networks and networks that are able to stand the test of, whatever's going to happen. The equipment's going to fail. Somebody's going to cut some fiber optics. Life happens. But if you plan for that and you provide the redundancy to be able to handle all of that, is very necessary. So
the rest of your slides are a little bit further down. So I think, yep, there you go. Yep.
Okay. So again, just the fact that you have to have power systems, you have to have backup systems, you have to have generators, because again, we have power outages here, the fun storms that we've gone through. All of those things have to take into consideration, and there's a cost associated with that. So to have, and I love your point that the Electrification Act of 1936, and then shortly that came into helping telephone companies. These networks and the foundation has been set for years and for generations. If the providers are doing the right thing, then they are building on that, and they've already got a lot of protection and redundancy built in place.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I was struck by with thinking about a good internet experience as well as reading the NTA Notice of Funding Opportunity is how much they'd focused on climate resiliency within the network as well. And certainly learned from what's happened in Texas recently about the importance of that kind of robustness. And I think the other thing is I'm like, people are sophisticated when they know when their broadband is not good or good enough, right? And they get frustrated. And I imagine that's something that folks in your business hear about, when someone says it's not good enough for what I need. How do you address those kind of issues as well when a customer feels that what they have is not good enough?
Well, definitely the education part. Let's put that into buckets. What part is not good enough?
Yeah.
Is it the functional, your remote learning, you're working from home, or is it the entertainment aspect of it? Okay. Let's categorize that and let's be honest about that. But yes, we have found that talking to customers should not be scary. You need to be transparent. You need to educate them on, hey, here's what we can do today. Here's what we're trying to work towards tomorrow. Help us get there, and we'll educate them on that. And once we sit down, unfortunately, I can't sit down with every individual, but I found that every time we have these conversations, they're understanding and they're appreciative of the effort that we're putting into it. It's just not having those conversations is where the gap and the perceptions kind of turn ugly.
I think that's a great line that maybe we could record. Talking to customers should not be scary. I think it's, that's a lesson maybe we all can take home. Talking to students shouldn't be scary. Talking to constituents shouldn't be scary. Talking to customers shouldn't be scary. These are humans at the end of the day. Jennifer, did you want to add anything? No, I think you're good. All right, okay. Well, because the next question's for you, actually, which is great. So adoption is always an issue and almost always lags behind deployment in so many communities. Aside from infrastructure, what other reasons are there to explain why people are not subscribing to a network? And how are policymakers aiming to correct these issues of adoption rather than just deployment?
So absolutely. I mean, if we look at, and I'll show a map in just a second, or maybe I should show it now.
Go backwards. Yeah.
That map. So we see, if we're talking about 25 by 3, and I'll mention more on that in a second, but if we're talking about 25 by 3 broadband, the majority of the population of the state of Texas is covered. Obviously, we have large areas of land that are not covered by those speeds because we have such vast land in Texas and lots of remote, not densely populated areas. But when we talk about adoption of broadband, of fixed broadband in the home, only about 68% of Texans are actually subscribing to broadband. And that data comes from the American Community Survey. And so that's conducted by the US Census. So we know that though connectivity physically exists for a lot of Texans, almost every Texan, we've got, 30% drop off because they're not subscribing. And what is that reason? Well, there's probably a lot of reasons, and it's probably often more than one reason. The biggest reason that I think we all think about immediately is affordability. Oftentimes, urban, suburban, rural affordability is that number one barrier. We do see when we get further into rural areas that costs are higher, but we also have pretty high costs in some of our urban areas too. I have in Austin, because I live in central Austin, I have a fiber connection at my home. I pay $70 a month, that's taxes and fees included, for gig symmetrical service. If you go a couple counties over to Milam County, if you want to get 100 symmetrical service, that cost is $150. So more than double what I'm paying for a tenth of what I get. And so we do see that just an hour outside of Austin that those costs can really double and not the same level of speed. And so that affordability piece is happening absolutely everywhere, sometimes worse in rural communities, but still really everywhere in Texas. Another thing we have to think about is, do we have devices at home? I think, COVID led us to handle the device issues for many of our students, but not every family and not every household had a student in school that we were able to send a device home with. And even one device in a household when maybe somebody needs to do a telehealth appointment, or maybe they needed to apply for a job online. Maybe they needed to work from home for a few days a week. One device for a family probably isn't enough. And so if folks don't have devices at home, maybe they're not subscribing. We even have families and households that just aren't interested in broadband. I know that would shock everyone in this room, probably, because we're all obviously very interested in broadband or we wouldn't be here. But we've got residents, we've got entire communities that are still not interested in broadband. I think eventually they'll get there. We talked about electricity before. Eventually, almost everyone came around and decided they wanted electricity. It may take us a while to get to everyone with broadband, but I do think that that's going to change, that eventually everyone is really going to see how much broadband and then all the technologies that broadband enables can really improve their lives, whether that is for working, whether that's for learning, whether that's for health, or whether it's for entertainment. I mean, it's all, or communicating with our families and friends. All of those are really important things. But we also, that skill piece that you mentioned previously, maybe you don't know how to use an iPad. Maybe you don't know how to use your tablet. Maybe, you don't know how to do a Zoom call or a telehealth appointment. So maybe you do have the money to subscribe to broadband, but you don't have the skills to use it. that's certainly not where I would spend my money. If I didn't know how to use it, I'm probably spending my money elsewhere. So we have to think about that piece in our communities too. So while affordability is what we hear over and over again, think about devices, think about skills, think about other barriers that might be unique in your community as to why people aren't subscribing, and think about all those things together, that it's not just one, and then come up with a public policy solution from there that meets the needs of what's actually going on in your community.
That's a great point for us all to take home. I think especially, I think we often assume connectivity, but we also assume device access, and we assume skills too. Even with young people, right? We say, well, they're digital natives. They know how to use it. I mean, I can tell you that a lot of my students don't know really how to take full advantage of their technology that they have, and they take it for granted. So important. Charlie, did you want to add to that?
Well, I just want to agree that it's all of the above. It could be one demographic or a different, in a different. And so you just have to look at that carefully. You have to evaluate that. But again, just communicating, showing what the value is. And that's where I think there's the biggest gap, is demonstrating the value of what this connection provides, whether it's education, whether it's your work life, or just the stress relief from the entertainment that we're getting out of that. Sometimes I think that's the biggest gap we have, is showing that there's huge value in here. I've got just the connection. I've got an attorney in my area that's kind of rough around the edges, is really bullish. And I've had, ever since I became CEO in the last 8 years, I've had 2 unfortunate outages that affected his service. And he calls me up, he has a direct line, and he calls me up, he says, Charlie, every time that I don't get a call or I don't have email, that could be $1 million, that I'm losing. Well, I'm not charging you enough then for my connection. If that's $1 million per call, can I get a piece of that? So there's value in what we do and what we provide as providers. And so I think that's the other missing element that we need to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. And just going back to the history lesson, I think one thing that the REA did so well is not only do connections, but went out into communities, met people where they are rather than bring people in, right? Is to meet folks where they are and to work there. So this actually, I think, this story about the attorney brings up an interesting question, around speed. Right? We talk about internet speeds. Obviously, the definition of broadband right now is 25.3, right? 25 megabits per second download, 3 megabits per second upload. Although we are also, hearing that 120 is going to be part of the build-out requirement for the NTIA. We also see a lot of different speeds advertised by providers. What is, how much internet speed do we need today, tomorrow, yesterday, 10 years from now? What do we really need at the end of the day?
Wow, that sounds like a trick question.
I know, yeah, it's not.
So I'm an engineer, and so I'm going to give you an engineering answer. And I feel like I'm talking to, my kids. It's like, I'll tell you what you need versus what you want. So let's jump over to this slide, and let's talk about the first 2 boxes that are closer to me. We connect over 40 schools and colleges in our area. And so I did a survey for all of the IT directors of all those schools. And I said, look, and I kind of knew the answers because I also have, I have 3 children in various different levels of school. And so I knew what kind of work they were doing online. Mm-hmm. But I did a survey and I said, what do they really need to connect to Google Docs, to upload and download their assignments? And being generous, all the IT professionals says they need 20 megs down and 10 megs up in order to do their homework assignment. If you look at Zoom, the Zoom or any of your video conferencing calls, you can look at the specifications and they see, well, you only need 4 megs down and 2 megs up in order to complete a successful Zoom call. That's telemedicine right there, using a Zoom call. So now, am I saying all we need is 25/3? No, I'm not.
Yeah.
These applications currently just use that. The rest, now if you look at the pie chart, you see that 70% of the bandwidth is the entertainment side of it. As an engineer, I'm going to design for the whole thing. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to just say, well, all you're going to get is 25/5. I'm going to engineer it and design it so it can handle everything that everybody wants. Right. Because it's not what we need, it's what we want. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. It's a whole package, and that's what we need to be realistic about. So when I first entered into this industry, into this business 25 years ago, one of the things that, as I sit around and talk to some of my provider friends, we would laugh at ourselves and we'd say, oh yeah, we put 12 fibers down this route. We're never going to use more than 12 fibers. Now these bundles are 260 something, strands of fiber optic. We don't put anything less than 144 strands down any road, any rural road, because you never know what you're going to need in the future. Our practice, I wish we would have started, 40 years ago, but we did it 20 years ago, is we started putting in a spare conduit everywhere we did construction, because that's your major expense is the construction. Yeah. I wish we would have started that sooner, but now we have spare conduit. So when we do run out of fiber, because that's going to happen, we'll have a spare conduit that we don't have to have that extra construction to pull that through. So I want to just add one last comparison. I do appreciate being compared to water and electricity as far as being how important it is. But let's talk about if there was a community that had zero growth in population, what's the water demand going to be for that community in a 5-year span? What's the electricity demand going to be in a 5-year span? That's pretty much going to be a flat line. It's going to be stagnant. Internet, it's going to grow exponentially. And so the computers and the servers and the routers and the equipment that is going to take to handle that has to be forklifted and replaced every 7 to 10 years. So that's where I would argue that it can't be compared. But I do appreciate that it's just as valuable and it's just as needed for communities to thrive, communities to grow, and for all of our residents to be connected.
Wow, that's fantastic. Thank you. And I applaud you for the second conduit. I mean, the kind of the mindset of dig once, right, is so important, especially when we talk about infrastructure. I mean, it would break my heart if Infrastructure Act paid for a new highway and then we ripped it up again to put in fiber, right? We need to be thinking much more in terms of coordination and future looking rather than what we need today, maybe. Jennifer, did you want to add to the very dicey speed conversation?
Certainly. I mean, just to Charlie's point, we're going to continue to need more and more and more. If all of us right now think about, I challenge you at this very moment, count up how many devices in your home connect to the internet. I'm sure every single person here has at least 10, if not more, devices in your home that connect to the internet. I often make the joke, I'm sure most of you have heard me make this joke, we have Wi-Fi crock pots. Mm-hmm. There's Wi-Fi dishwashers, obviously there's the smart thermostats, we've got the light switches, obviously you have your laptops, your cell phones, your smart TVs, cameras outside for security, cameras inside for security. It can add up really, really quickly. There's a lot more inventions on the way that are going to connect to the internet. And so we need to be planning for that and realizing that we're going to continue to need higher and higher speed moving forward. But something for us to all remember too is, in defense of, you see, well, I'm paying for this plan and I'm supposed to be getting 100 speed, and you do a speed test on your device and it's nowhere near 100. Well, think about how many other devices are on in your house at the same time. It's splitting up that 100 speed. So not every device is going to be able to get that 100 speed all at the same time. And if you're connecting through a router, a wireless router, you're going to lose speed there too. So I'm encouraging you to investigate things in your own home before calling your provider to yell at them. They're probably going to tell you all of the things I'm telling you right now, but check how many devices you have. If your router's really old, maybe look into changing your Wi-Fi router. If you need to, connect directly to the Ethernet cable. If there's something you really need to get done, you're going to get a much faster speed when you hardwire in than through any wireless router. And, we keep thinking about, 5G, and I don't want to get into that conversation, but most iPhones, most other phones aren't even 5G enabled at this point. If you've got, I think, an iPhone 12, that was the first one that's even 5G enabled. So if you've got a little bit older iPhone or a little bit older Android phone, even if there is a 5G network where you are, that device probably isn't even capable of taking advantage of that. That's the same thing with our laptops, with our tablets, with other devices. 5G may be there, but your device doesn't really care because it doesn't know how to use 5G yet.
Absolutely. It just makes me think, random statistic, but the average household has 11 connected devices. I, for one, get regular text messages from my air fryer. We're on a first name basis, her and I. So yeah, and you're right. All of these use incremental amounts of bandwidth. And so it's really important for us to keep all of that in mind. Absolutely. So Jennifer, I think this is a good segue to talk about what happened last week. Right, as we're looking now towards the future, the next 5-10 years of broadband, and 42, I think now it's gone down to 41.6 billion for the BEAD program. From your perspective, what are some of the key takeaways that from the NTIA's Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO?
So I think one of the biggest takeaways is that the goal ultimately, hopefully by the end of the decade, is for every home in the U.S. to be connected at a minimum speed of 100 over 20. So though the recognized definition at the FCC at the moment is still that 25 by 3, that could change at some point. But the goal of the infrastructure bill, what was laid out by the NTIA last week and will be discussed for a handful of years moving forward, is that every home in the country should have minimum speed of 100 by 20. Many are going to have more than that, but that really is our new minimum. I know you hate the phrase good enough.
I do.
But that's what we've determined now is good enough for at least the next little bit of time where we should aim. Other things, I took a lot of notes. I have too many things here, and I'm not going to say all of them. Things to think about that were really significant in the NOFO is that communities really need to be involved. Once grant funding is available, all the state broadband offices, regardless of state, and the NTIA is going to be looking for partnerships between communities and providers. So I mentioned it before. Get to know the providers in your community now. Be thinking about who you might want to work with. So once, Greg starts handing out his money, you've got a partner already identified, and you can support them when they go after those dollars to do that build in your community. On top of that, you're actually going to get what you want, more likely, if you're working with that partner, provider, or providers. I've said this before, I'll say it again. Broadband has been done to communities. Up until now, it's been something that's been done to communities. Very rarely have communities had the type of opportunity to really participate in this conversation and really chat with providers before infrastructure goes in the ground, before infrastructure is updated, before service quality is updated, before we talk about affordability. That hasn't really happened before. Broadband has been done to communities. But now is the time for communities to partner with providers, figure out what you want, what you need, and tell them that's what you're going to support. And then when they're going after funds in these areas that are eligible, you can then support their application, or you can say, you know what, I've met with that provider and they really aren't interested in meeting the needs of our community as we understand them. And you can make that clear as well too. So make sure you get to know all the providers that are interested in serving your community so that you're ready once this funding comes out. Something that also is very interesting are match requirements. The comptroller mentioned this. There's going to be, for the BEAD program, that Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, there is going to be a 25% match. That is something communities can help with. So though many providers will likely make that 25% match themselves, it could be communities that come in and help with that 25% match toward those grant funds. And then I think the final thing I'll say is that they did lay out a list of priorities. It's going to be unserved locations first, then underserved locations if there's money left over, and then community anchor institutions after that. Texas, likely, from everything we've seen so far, is probably going to receive the largest allotment in funds once they run the calculation for this piece of money. That sounds great. Yay, we're number one. Well, thing about that means we're number one worse off. We have more people that need help than any other state in the entire country. So we've got quite a challenge ahead of us. And the more that we all can do to support Greg and his team at the Broadband Development Office, when communities can provide feedback to them and help throughout the process, the more successful we're actually going to be in utilizing all of these dollars to make sure that every Texan really is connected by the end of the decade.
Yeah, that's fantastic wisdom. Thank you, Jennifer. Charlie, did you want to add anything about what you're hopeful for, how communities can approach providers? What do we need to think of going forward to access some of the state money that Texas is going to get?
So I agree everything that Jennifer said, and there needs to be more of that. There needs to be more collaboration and communication. But But I will also challenge that there are pockets of success stories out there already. And so I've said this before in other presentations, identify where those success stories are and study the DNA of what made that successful, what made them approachable. How did that community leaders were able to talk to the providers? There's already a DNA of some pockets of success all over Texas. I'm not saying that we don't need the help that's been identified. I agree with that. But there's already pockets of success. There's DNA that can be duplicated and become effective in some of these other areas. So let's focus on that and maybe rise up some of those stars and saying, hey, they did it right. How can we duplicate that and take that into other communities? And it may be some of the same players or it may be somebody different. But those are some things that we need to study.
Absolutely. You know, two things I wanted to add, and I'll phrase this as a statement / question for Charlie, actually, is what interested me, part of the notice of funding opportunity, is the need for the mandate for a low-cost tier and a middle-class cost tier for providers. Charlie, I'm wondering if you could tell us what might that look like for a provider, a low-cost tier and a middle. I was surprised to see a middle-class tier in there, and what would that mean for someone in your position?
Boy, this is going to turn into a lot of fun conversations. You know,
Sorry,
I'll be sitting in the corner. Anybody want to talk to me about this? What I'm about to say. So listen, looking at the same chart, there's a passion for me and for a lot of our providers that we definitely want to connect students. We want to connect remote workers. I'll gladly give that away if I could afford to give it away. But the entertainment aspect of it, how does that fall into place? So yes, I'd love to give away $10 internet for students, $10 internet for remote workers. But until I can go to the Super Bowl for a $100 bill, I don't know about giving entertainment side of that away, because that's what's giving us the headaches. We have to upgrade our networks. We're not able to keep pace because of the entertainment traffic that's going through this. So if y'all help me understand how that's going to work out and we're going to be able to budget future network upgrades to manage that growth, I'll gladly, and a lot of providers are with me that are in the room. We want to help our communities. We want to help our students and remote workers, but that's not what is burdening our super highways, and it's causing all the potholes that don't get repaired in time.
I think that's a really good point. We often dismiss the entertainment aspect as, well, whatever, that's the luxury part. Like, let's focus on education and health and economic development. But, everyone needs a time to binge their Netflix and watch their Murder, She Wrote. And we can't, I watch a lot of Murder, She Wrote. But we can't dismiss that, because as you're showing us here, this is what people are using it for. And that is as significant, I think, to a lot of people's lives as the education component, right? It's the holistic package of an internet experience that includes entertainment. And we can't dismiss that, or we can't just say, well, that's minor, because as you showed us here, it's not minor.
And I want to be able to be everybody with eyes wide open as we have these conversations. Yes, we want to make things affordable, but we have to continue to upgrade these networks. And so how are we going to pay for that? And again, the entertainment aspect, entertainment and any other media is going up. It's costing more. Artists are making more. So how is that going to help us, to keep connecting those artists and connecting those big tech companies to their customers that are pretty much paying for it all?
Right. Absolutely, yeah. We're coming into the last 5 minutes ish of our conversation here, which has been, I've learned so much, and I love hearing your wisdom, both of you. I'm wondering if we could start wrapping up with some last words, some last comments. What, if there was one or two sound bites that we all in this room could take away, what should we be taking away from our conversation about going forward, about best practices, about networking? Anything you want. Jennifer, I'll start with you.
I've said it twice already. Get to know the providers in your community now. Do not wait until there's a grant application available. Have those conversations now. Learn about the assets in your community, whether those assets are ones that are currently providing connectivity or whether they're assets that could be used to provide connectivity. We know in Texas that part of the conversation is going to be based on wireless connection to the home. Be thinking about tall structures in your community that you could use in a public-private partnership. Maybe it's a water tower that you're able to use that hits a good portion of the folks that live within the city limits or the town limits. And you can use that already elevated infrastructure that you don't have to build a new tower. That's a public-private partnership right there that likely didn't cost the community anything, would maybe then enable a provider to serve a certain number of folks in the community. So be having those conversations about how you might want to partner to go after grant funds, how you can use the assets that are already in your community to support what's going on, and also ask community members what they really need. I mean, Charlie's graph here, what do residents really want? Do they really want to make sure that their entertainment is great all the time? Do they really want to make sure that they can use telehealth? And the want and need is very different. I mentioned before, I have gig symmetrical fiber. They keep trying to sell me 2 gig symmetrical fiber. I think probably a lot of people are subscribing to that because this is America and that's a want. I don't know that many people need 2 gig symmetrical service at their homes today. I might tell you something very different 5 years from now, but today 2 gig may be a little bit too much in your home, but some people are being offered that type of service. So be thinking about the difference in want and need. I think the 1 gig is definitely more than enough for me right now based on what I have, but maybe I get a lot more devices in the next few years and that 2 gig does become a reality, or the way entertainment is streamed changes. Maybe we do really start getting 3D entertainment in our homes that changes from what we think about on our TVs right now, and that is going to take more connectivity. So be having those conversations in your community about that demand piece. But then thirdly, think about devices at home and that skills piece. A part that we haven't discussed today is the fact that the Digital Equity Act was rolled into the infrastructure bill. And there are going to be dollars eventually that are going to be a competitive grant process that communities can go after. So if you're identifying right now that you're lacking in digital skills, whether that's because folks don't know how to do a job application online, don't know how to use telehealth, don't know how to check kids' grades at school, whatever it may be, start thinking about how you might want to spend some of those dollars that communities will be eligible to apply for that digital equity program. Be thinking about that now. Once again, do your homework now so that when that grant plan or grant does open up, you're ready to go after it.
Great, thank you. And you actually bring up an important point that we hadn't had a chance to talk about, and hopefully we will today, is the role that wireless will play in rural broadband deployment, right? Particularly high capacity fixed wireless. And I know a lot of Midwest communities are using grain silos to do wireless, which I just think is the coolest thing. I'm a little in love with grain silos, and I'm also still very jealous that you pay $70 a month for a gig symmetric. I don't. Charlie, last words for you.
So I'll talk about the technologies a little bit. So as an engineer, obviously we're going to favor what the best gold standard is, and that's fiber optics. But the economics is not going to allow us to build fiber in every single corner of Texas. So there is a fit for fixed wireless and also satellite. We're not opposed to, again, from an engineering perspective, not opposed to that. That it needs to all work all work together to be able to connect every hard to reach corner of the state. What I will say is, being an engineering nerd, I think that we need to focus on the data and make sure that the data is telling us as much information as possible, so then our regulators can come up with a good formula to help that out. Right now, if you believe everything that you read off the internet and definitions, urban is defined to be 1,000 houses or 1,000 structures per square mile. Rural is defined to be anywhere between 1 and 999. That's broad. That's too big of a gap in there. I think we need to start in probably creating some more realistic buckets. You'll have urban, suburban, rural, ultra rural, and witness protection. Witness protection just gets satellite. Okay, that's just automatic. But I think that you then can kind of start overlapping. Where can you justify fiber optics? Where do we have to then start leaning on fixed wireless or 5G? And where is satellite going to be the only solution? And then we can then allocate those dollars on which provider is going to be best positioned with those types of networks. So I think more studies and more analytics has to go into the mapping. I'm hoping that's something that's going to come out. But my position would be study it better so we can then have better decision making.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you, Jennifer.
I have one last word. Everybody has access to this book. Mine's marked up. I've got lots of comments in here. Once everyone reads it, please contact me. I've been wanting to start a book club, and I think this is the first book that we should start talking about. So please reach out once you've read it. I'd love to discuss it with you, and please feel free to talk with Dr. Ali about all the thoughts in his book. It's absolutely incredible, and I think is going to be a great help to our state and our country.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jennifer and Charlie. Thank you all for a great morning. Really appreciate it.